The Insanity with all the flavor blackbacks, H magnets. Here's a classic. This is a classic. This is the one I'm going to be ended up using. 30 watt G12H, 55 hertz, and here's a little callback next to it. Got creambacks in here. Here, old school greenback, and there greenbacks. I'm losing my mind. I am losing my goddamn mind.
And this is so sad.
Hey all, welcome to Circle of Tone. And before we get started, patrons. 42. It's gone up. Yeah, 42 on its way to 100. So yeah, thanks to my patrons. We have some new patrons. Thanks to Richard P again. Savage. Thanks to Clint N, Andrew G, Sean T, and Lame J. Because we're on a race to 100 for 100 patrons. And we're currently almost halfway. 42. As you can see through my scientific diagram here. We'll trim strings for food. People might know Owie likes to let his strings flap and fly in the wind. So this is how you support the channel. So if you can't help out on Patreon, just a like, a share, a subscribe, hit the bell. Alright chaps, on to another AC/DC video. Oh, let it go, let it go, let it go. I'll never let it go, but I think I figured it out. I couldn't let it go. I've actually put up a video, a previous AC/DC video, where I've attempted it in the past. If you're new to this channel, I've been trying to get this tone. My earliest YouTube videos were just like an iPhone pointed at an amp, and I'm trying to do it then. As I got more experienced, you know, I still try to get different things to match the tone of a specific album, and that is Let There Be Rock by AC/DC. When you listen to other albums, nothing really sounds like it in the AC/DC category. When you watch AC/DC play live, there's only a few gigs where it actually sounds like the actual amp, and it's hard to pinpoint because a lot of these head boxes kind of, especially with AC/DC, they'd have different heads inside of different head boxes because they burn up so often, you know, they fall off the back of a truck, and you know they're being stitched together, they're renting gear, there's all sorts of stuff on stage. It's not necessarily what they use in the studio, that's what's on stage with them. So that's why this album is so hard to pin down, and there's been some great work by people like Solo Dallas and on the forums and trying to pin down what the hell is this amp. And the consensus was, I thought it was a super bass and a JTM 45, because the general consensus stated that it was a 2203, a Marshall, the early JMP, you know, and it went on to be the JCM 800. So everybody was thinking it's that. And my main amp, my albums through my life, my main amp has always been a JCM 800. I know what a JCM 800 sounds like. That's based on a JMP, the late 70s versions of the 2203, and I can tell you that album is not a 2203. And I was convinced, but I actually have finally, because all these were opinions. Mine was an opinion. There was no concrete proof on what amps were there. There was all lots of, you know, I think it was this, it was probably that, and they had a deal with Marshall, so it might have been this and that and the other. But I contacted someone that was actually in the room for Let There Be Rock, and he got back to me. One of the engineers, Mark Opitz, he actually got back to me, and he filled in my gaps. And I'm going to say, the rumors that they had the latest and greatest from Marshall are true. Best to his memory, he said they were sponsored by Marshall at the time, and they used what was latest at the time. So that would have been a blackback, and that would have been the 2203, or was it? Check out. I'm not gonna give it all away. Okay, this means nothing to the average person watching now, but I'm like, it's not a 2203. I'm fucking convinced. There's nothing you can do with those knobs that'll make it sound like this. Fuck no. I don't care what guitar you're using. There's other things that were in my chain that would knock down the percentages a little bit, but there's no way. I know the voicing. I know the character. I know the tightness. I know that amp inside out. Or do I? If you check this video out, one of the reasons where I thought I was getting too much gain was because they used 50-watt amps a lot of the time. So check out this video of me pulling the outer tubes, the outer power tubes, which knocks down the actual volume. It changes it into a 50-watt amp, essentially. Don't do this at home. It does have its risks. You do have to mess around with the ohmage and things like that to make sure everything matches. But I know how to do it. I've done it a lot in the past. Little tip, if one of your power tube goes out, you can just do this little trick, pull two of them and put the good ones in there to remain to get a little bit more juice. You lose a bit of oomph. Let's get to it. I'm getting circular tone on your ass. It actually made it sound a little bit more gainy, because then to make up, when you turn up the volume, it's a weird thing. You'd think that it would lose gain because it's not driving the speaker as much, but somehow this actually, it made the gain a little less full, so it gave the perceived less gain. So it wasn't that. It wasn't the 2203 or 50 watts. And then I did some research on what was around at that time. Now the consensus is these 2203s had just come out. They had just come out. And that's why I was skeptical about it, because shipping things to Australia back then in the 70s, you know, it's not exactly next day delivery, you know. It's from the UK to the opposite end of the earth to Australia. So but AC/DC were on tour in the UK before that, so they could have brought some shit home with them. But it's not a 2203. I'm convinced, my ears tell me it's not a 2203. If anybody has experience with these amps, it's me, okay? But I didn't know that the 50-watt version for the first year, when these 2204s came out, 2204, basically the 50-watt version of the JMP, that had a different gain stage to regular ones. They call it, it had non-cascading gain on it. So just for the 50-watt version of the 2204 Marshall that was out at the time, that first year, they were different. They did not sound like the 2204s that came out later on, because the first year, the 100 watters, the 2203s, from day one, they were cascaded gain staged. On this one, the gain was non-cascading. So it sounded different. So I was like, what's the difference between non-cascading and cascading preamp section? So I did my research online, and I was getting things like, how do I mod my 2204 so that it becomes cascading gain? How could it, why is it so shrill? Why is it kind of sounds too nasally? I was getting all these things of what that album was, because it sounds like a broken box of rocks. If you listen to Let There Be Rock guitars, they're so gloriously messy, and it sounds like breaking glass. So it's a 2204. So they did get the deal from Marshall. They did get the earliest model, but they got the early model of the 50 watt. I mean, everybody claims that they often use 50 watts anyway. So that's another part of the puzzle that's filled. So I think I've cracked it. I can't say 100%, but, you know, because there's always outlying things, like they might have had a Vox in the corner for all I know. Then, you know, the engineers have shady memories, but there's so many references to Marshall, like at the end of the album, A Whole Lot of Rosie, one of the Marshalls caught fire. There's like multiple people talking about how it started smoking during a solo, because they did the solos at the end. They didn't track them live, you know, the solos. So one of the Marshalls finally give up the ghost. And if you've seen the reviews of the 2204 where people are complaining about it, straight after that, they stopped using them on the album because they don't think they actually liked them. They went back to using the super bass and the JTM 45. I think they set it like they thought it was a plexi, and you can't on 2204s and 2203s. The it's kind of different. It's a different type of gain. It's tighter and the rest of it. But with the 2204, if you have one of these amps, leave it stock, because I think that when word gets out that that album was probably a 2204 from that specific year, you have a golden piece of history in your hands. Don't mod it, just turn it up as loud as you can with a blackback speaker and watch it catch fire, so that it has to catch fire to be a legit recreation of AC/DC. See, that's a genuine sigh of relief, because I had no idea that the first year the 50-watt version of the JMP 2204 was different from the rest. I know Marshalls a little bit, and what's funny is a YouTuber, Henan Pauly, actually started. He's never really had much experience with Marshalls, and he said, "Oh, here's my JMP whatever," and somebody said, "No, that's a JCM 800. It's not the JMP." And I actually responded to say, "Welcome to the world of Marshall," because those bastards, they change things up. It could be the same model, same whatever. You open it up, it's like half the components are different. There was so many incremental changes when it came to Marshall that it was hard to keep up. That's why I prefer the older Marshalls, just because of things like the old mustard caps. Like, even though I have new old stock mustard caps in here, I have old wire, I have old parts and everything. So it's like, I kind of get that aspect of trying to keep it real, which is why AC/DC has messed me up for so long. And I think I've cracked it. And if this was John Wilder, I'd be cracking open my bottle of vodka right now. It's Friday night. Maybe I will get fucked up. Let's do this together. Let's raise a glass to AC/DC. Let's raise a glass to loosey goosey, go for it, rock and roll, new amps, on fire, all playing at the same time, killing it. That's what it's all about. Fucking rock and roll. And Mark Opitz also told me, like, on another album that they worked together on, this reminds me of the Road Crew as well. AC/DC are world famous for having the best roadies, techs, the Road Crew. They were like a well-oiled machine. They'd have fun, they'd party, but a lot of AC/DC success has come from the people they surround themselves with. Like early on, their brother, not Malcolm, I forget his name, which is kind of messed up, but his brother was a big influence because he was kind of a producer and successful musician on a local level. And Opitz actually would line up all the Marshalls and pick out the best sounding one, because, like I say, they can all have the same name on the plate. And to be honest, a lot of the time that could be like a hot bias. A hot bias might sound really good, but they were engineers. They weren't just stoners. They knew the insides and outsides. They could fix a desk if you needed to, fix a Neve desk at the drop of a hat. These type of people. So they would know a cold bias versus a hot bias versus a whatever. But still, when everything is set the same, you can still have something which has a sweet spot. Usually just simple things like the best solder jobs. There's no leaking capacitors, or there is a leaking capacitor, and that's a little bit of the magic. Everything can drift. There might be a slightly tolerances within capacitors, because they're not always spot on back then. There's little tolerances, so there's like a 5% shift on each side. The little detail. So while I say just balls out rock and roll, it's balls out rock and roll with a granite plinth underneath them, a structure to help you out. Because a lot of people, I'm seeing, there's bands on my Facebook group. Go to Circle of Tone on Facebook and come join us. There's some bands on there. I'm like, I wish I was a manager sometimes, where you can just try and mold them, because I've got my own stuff that I'm trying to mold. You know what I mean? But there's so much talent, and we don't have the structure. I don't have the structure. They don't have the structure, and that is what's missing when it comes down to music, where you're not getting big label backing, you're not getting the right managers, you're not getting the right structure. Now let's talk about, I mean, if you're still here, you're interested in AC/DC, so let's talk about the little things that I got wrong. Um, let's have a look at this guy. Things which would, the little 5%, that do add up over time, but still, it wasn't a 2203. I'm fucking convinced of that. Let's argue. So his era of Gibson back then, I believe it had a vibrola on it. So that's a big metal plate that comes down here. I don't think he had the wiggle stick on it, or even the sideways one it could have been. So that was different. So this bridge, it wasn't the classic type of bridge. And I think the actual saddles on that were plastic. So there's plastic saddles. And I know normally you'd think plastic and that's bad, but it's one of my favorite SGs had the plastic on it. It's the Badfinger one. The Beatles used it, so just because it's plastic doesn't mean it's bad. It's not tight. I prefer tightness because I'm more of a metal player, but it actually tames an SG a little bit. It tames a little. These can be snarky bitches. These pickups are really close to the bridge on Gibsons. I think this might be a little bit further away because it's an Epiphone. So there's little things like that. There's also I have the electronics in here. I did a few upgrades, which will take it away a little bit more modern. I got a pure tone jack that I put in there, and I changed 2 internal wires. So the insides of this, it's got really shit caps, really shit pots. The old Central Lab pots will sound different. It'll actually knock down a little bit of the scree, because a lot of modern electronics are really efficient. Some of the older stuff wasn't efficient. It was essentially broken. The old disc caps, they're not as reliable as today's modern capacitors, but they it's almost like tape, where it's not as pristine as digital. When you go to it, you hear more in digital. With tape, you've had noise flow and hiss and flutter and wow, but it's still, for some reason, that mellowing effect is big. And another mellowing effect that I did use on this was really long cables. Before you tell me about the wireless transmitter that's on that Angus used to use to boost the signal, that was after this album. How many times do I have to say it? That was straight after this album on the tour. He didn't use that and let the rock out that thing. I'm sorry, but god damn, you don't think I've heard of that? What he used to do before, because these are shrill, and old Marshall plexis and the rest of it, they are shrill, with the old greenbacks, which are really shrill. He used to knock it down with a very long cable, because that would knock down some of the high end and it would make it a bit murkier. So that's the same type of thing that I did that with this, but still with digital, with close micing, it's a different type of sound. So it's very keening, tinny. It's tough close micing in the modern era, I'm telling you, because by the time it's gone through tape and consoles and old compressors, old cables and 100 feet of studio cables, it knocks down a lot of that treble. Hendrix is the biggest proponent of using crappy, coily, long cables to knock down some of the teeth grinding, enamel removing treble that you get on these old albums if they went to digital. If you put an SM57 in front of whatever tiny amp that was being used on Led Zeppelin with his Strat, no, it would not sound good, trust me. So there's a lot to be said about how poor the signal was back in those days. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. So yeah, so little differences like that. The electronics, my pickup is really close to what he would have used, an old T-top from, just when they went over. It might have even had a path at one point, but I think he just sweated the shit out of it. And you never really know what's in there, because those old pickups, they used to go through pickups like nothing else, like butter. So yeah. And also, you have the classic tuners. I've got Grovers. I've upgraded the shit out of this. This is my own pickup, by the way. If you like that tone, you can buy my pickup for $70 at circleoftone.com. So get a Gretsch, because in my first video, I was like, the secret to the tone is a large part of it was Malcolm's Gretsch and his actual playing style. His playing style, it's annoying me now. His playing style is inimitable. I could not get it. I consider myself a good guitarist. I've been through that in the old videos. Check out the description for my other videos that I've done on this, by the way. So I thought I'd buy this because it's going to be close, because it has the same type of pickups in there. So I thought, and the rest of it. And I was like, it's too much gain. You can hear me complaining about it. And I didn't know that these pickups are twice as powerful as the pickups that he would have had back in the day. It's actually hard. This is called the Gretsch Electromatic, right? There's no other markings on it to tell me what it is. And there's like 12 different types of Electromatics. And these pickups are like, they're as high output as the ones on my Gibson, you know? Actually, yeah, they're probably around the same. So the ones that he would have used were about 4K, and that would have knocked down a lot of the gain, but still, 2203 is not in the same ballpark. Also, you know, he's kind of like has, this is solid body, so there would be a lot of changes compared to what he had, but that was a big one for me, so it's kind of made this redundant. But it still sounds, it's actually a really good guitar. It is a really good guitar. And it actually, the pickups do sound pretty good. But I prefer my pickups that you can buy at Circle of Tone. So yeah, so this was kind of out. And I was going to recreate it with a 2203. Actually, what you heard there was his settings. Malcolm, on a 2203 style amp, he had usually the presence on 0 and everything else on 5, usually. You know, gain depending on what he was doing, what songs, what you know, he tend to roll down the gain. Like I had a lot of gain at one point in my little messing around playthroughs, but you can see me taking it down a little bit with the volume, and he takes it down a lot. So then when he wants to rage and really go balls to the wall with a solo, he has enough gain on tap. So what a band, what a band. I just posted a video of it's a backstage footage of them in Paris, and it's pretty damn cool seeing them just messing around, warming up. You can see the drummer taping his hands up like a fighter, and it's the Bon Scott. I love him. I almost as if I've seen so many documentaries and read stories about him. I feel like I know him, but I think that is part of his charm, because he does feel like that crazy guy down the pub that you might end up in a fight with, or you might end up marrying his sister, you know, in the same day. All right, chaps, you've been awesome. If you like these types of vids, subscribe. I mean, throw me a bone and hit like, scratch my back, share, all these things that old people don't do, and that's why our channels die. But it is what it is. I'm still going to do these regardless of the size of my channel, because it's fun. Do what you love, right? Get woke, go broke. And with that, I think I'm going to close the door on this unless anyone can prove me wrong, but I will be looking out for a 2204 from that specific year if they pop up. It's pretty funny though on the forums where they say how broken it sounds, and it's like, yeah, it's broken, perfectly broken. But then again, AC/DC can play through a toaster and make it sound good, so I think that's part of the secret as well. Let there be light! There was light! Let there be drums! There was drums! Let there be guitar! There was guitar! Ah!